They told you Jesus worked through rituals, prayers, and obedience, because that version makes you harmless. I am going to say this plainly, without softening it. The original teaching was altered on purpose, not to protect faith, but to control access. What was removed was not theology. What was removed was function. When the early institutions consolidated power, they stripped Jesus of his most dangerous gift and replaced it with ceremony. Ritual keeps crowds calm. Direct interaction with reality creates sovereign individuals. You were taught that miracles require pleading, kneeling, repetition, and submission. That is why so many of you have prayed faithfully and felt nothing change. The frustration you carry is not a failure of belief. It is the echo of something that was taken from you before you were born. You were handed symbols instead of mechanisms, words instead of interfaces, promises instead of tools. I am not speculating. I am remembering. And if you are listening closely, something in you is remembering too. The earliest layers of the tradition did not center on altars or chants. They centered on hands, matter, proximity, and intention made physical. That knowledge did not vanish by accident. It was edited out because it bypassed hierarchy. You feel this because you were never meant to be managed by ritual alone. You were meant to work with reality directly. If this statement unsettles you, good. That tension is the first crack in the structure that kept you compliant. Stay with me. What comes next is not belief. It is recovery. When institutions erase knowledge, they do not burn everything. They fragment it. They scatter it across deserts, caves, marginal sects, and languages declared heretical. What survived did so because it was incomplete, misfiled, or dismissed as dangerous nonsense. That is where the real trail begins, not in official canon but in the discarded margins. In the texts recovered at Nag Hammadi, in sayings attributed to Jesus that were never meant for public liturgy, the emphasis is not on worship but on capacity. Jesus does not ask for devotion. He assumes capability. He speaks as if the listener already has access, already knows, but has forgotten how to engage it. These are not sermons. They are reminders. They read like technical notes spoken in metaphor because metaphor was the only safe container. Pay attention to what is missing. There is no insistence on ritual purity, no repetition of prescribed words, no hierarchy between speaker and listener. Instead, there is immediacy, touch, nearness, a constant return to the body as the site of activation. The hand is mentioned more than the temple, the eye more than the altar. Earth and water appear not as symbols, but as cooperating elements. This is why these texts were excluded. They bypass intermediaries. If Jesus taught people how to work with matter directly, then priests became optional. If healing occurred through contact, then permission lost its power. A system cannot survive if access is internal and practical. So the narrative was reframed. What was once instruction became allegory. What was once a method became a miracle story told at a distance. You were taught to admire these accounts, not to replicate them. That was the trick. Admiration keeps you passive. Replication makes you dangerous. I am not asking you to accept this because it is ancient. I am asking you to notice how consistent it is across suppressed material. The same pattern repeats. Jesus intervenes physically, immediately, without preparation or ceremony. He does not withdraw to pray before acting. He acts, and the act itself is the transmission. This is not mysticism. It is mechanics expressed in the only language available at the time. When you strip away the theological varnish, what remains is a teaching about interaction. Consciousness does not float above matter. It enters it. The body is not a barrier to spirit. It is the handle. If this resonates, it is because it is older than doctrine, older than control. It belongs to the layer of teaching that assumed humans were capable participants in reality, not dependents waiting for permission, and that assumption is precisely what had to be erased. Ritual was not the original problem. Control was. Ritual became the solution because it looks active while keeping you inactive. It gives the body something to do while removing its ability to intervene. Repetition replaces engagement. Symbol replaces contact. Over time, the meaning shifts so completely that people forget anything else ever existed. Look closely at what ritual actually is. It is a closed loop. The same words, the same gestures, the same timing, performed regardless of context. It does not respond to the situation in front of you. It asks you to conform to a pattern that existed before you arrived. That is why it scales so well and why institutions love it. A ritual does not care who performs it. A real operation does. What Jesus practiced was not ritualized behavior. It was situational intervention. He did not repeat a formula. He responded to what was present. One time it was touch. Another time it was mud. Another time it was a command spoken at close range. The variation is the point. If it were ritual, it would have been consistent. Instead, it was adaptive. This is where the deception deepened. Later editors reframed these interventions as signs of divine exception, not demonstrations of method. The message shifted from "this is how it works" to "this happened once because he was different." That single change severed replication. You were taught to worship the outcome and ignore the process. Ritual trains the nervous system to wait, to defer, to believe that power arrives from outside on schedule if you perform correctly. Physical operation trains the nervous system to engage, to assess, to touch, to act. One keeps you compliant, the other makes you present. I am not condemning ritual for its symbolism. Symbol has a place, but symbol without access becomes a cage. When symbols are divorced from their original function, they become distractions. You end up circling the sign instead of entering the mechanism it once pointed to. Notice how ritual always requires permission, time, place, authority. Notice how the actions of Jesus required none. He intervened in streets, homes, fields. No preparation, no invocation, no appeal, upward. He did not ask reality to change. He addressed it directly. This is the distinction they never explained to you. Ritual is performance. Operation is contact. One operates in imagination and memory. The other operates in matter. As long as you are kept inside ritual, you will search endlessly for belief strong enough to move the world. When you step into operation, belief becomes irrelevant. Presence replaces it. If this unsettles your understanding of faith, let it. Faith was never meant to replace action. It was meant to stabilize the one who acts. That inversion is not accidental. It was engineered. To understand what was removed, you must stop thinking of matter as dead. That idea is not ancient. It is recent, and it is useful only to systems that want you disembodied. In the older understanding, matter was responsive. It was not passive substance waiting to be used. It was an interface, a meeting point where intention could enter form. Jesus worked at that interface, not symbolically, but functionally. The body was the instrument. The hand was not a metaphor, it was a switch. When contact occurred, information transferred. Not belief, not emotion, information. That is why distance mattered. That is why proximity appears again and again in the suppressed accounts. He moved close because operation requires contact. Think of matter as holding state. Everything you touch is already carrying instruction, memory, arrangement. When intention enters through the body, it does not override matter. It reorganizes it. This is why the gestures were simple. No theatrics, no spectacle. Complexity weakens transmission. Directness sharpens it. This is also why later theology avoided explaining the mechanics. Once you describe how interaction works, people begin to experiment. Once they experiment, they stop needing permission. So the language shifted. Matter became inert, spirit became distant. The body became a problem to escape instead of the primary tool of engagement. But notice what Jesus never did. He never treated the body as an obstacle. He did not transcend matter. He entered it. He did not speak about leaving the world. He spoke about the kingdom being already here, already among you. That statement only makes sense if reality itself is accessible, not deferred. The hand, the breath, the eye, the voice at close range. These were not symbolic props. They were interfaces designed to couple consciousness with structure. When you remove the body from the equation, you are left with prayer that goes nowhere and belief that never lands. This is not science as you were taught it, and it is not mysticism either. It is an older logic, one that understands that consciousness without contact is imagination, and contact without consciousness is inertia. Operation happens only where the two meet. You are told to visualize change, to hope for change, to ask for change. Jesus demonstrated how to enter the field where change actually occurs. That field is not above you. It is not beyond you. It is exactly where your body meets the world. Once you see matter as an interface, everything shifts. Healing stops being supernatural, transformation stops being random, authority stops being external. The question is no longer whether God will act. The question becomes whether you are present enough to engage the mechanism. This understanding was not removed because it was false. It was removed because it worked. If you are still here, it is not by accident. This material does not attract everyone. Most people feel discomfort and turn away because what I am describing removes excuses. It does not flatter dependency. It does not offer salvation as a future event. It places responsibility back into the hands of the individual. That is why only a certain type of person stays. Jesus never spoke as if all listeners were equal. He spoke in layers, to the crowd, stories, to the close ones, instruction, to a few, direct transfer. This was not elitism. It was calibration. You do not give operational knowledge to someone who only wants reassurance. You give it to those who feel the tension between what they were promised and what actually works. You have felt that tension. You sensed early that repeating words without contact changed nothing. You noticed that ceremonies comforted people, but rarely transformed them. That dissatisfaction was labeled doubt, weakness, or pride. In truth, it was recognition. You were designed to interact, not to wait. This is why the idea of chosen was corrupted. It was turned into moral superiority or divine favoritism. In the original sense, it simply meant compatible. Some nervous systems are wired for direct engagement. Some minds cannot rest inside abstraction. They need feedback. They need contact. They need to test reality with their own hands. If you are one of those, religion as performance always felt empty. Not because you lacked faith, but because you were meant to operate, not observe. The system could not use you as you were, so it tried to reprogram you into compliance. When that failed, it told you that you were broken. You are not broken. You are miscategorized. Jesus spoke to people like you as if you already knew what he was saying. He did not explain everything. He assumed resonance. That assumption is the marker. When instruction feels like remembrance rather than learning, you're in the right layer. I am not elevating you above others. I am placing you where you belong. Among those who are uncomfortable with second-hand authority, among those who feel constrained by symbol and instinctively reach for mechanism, among those who sense that reality is responsive, not sealed. This is not about identity. It is about function. If this is landing, it is because your system recognizes the language of operation. You are not being recruited. You are being reactivated. What comes next will not ask you to believe anything. It will ask you to notice, to engage, and to test. That is why this knowledge survived in fragments. It only works on those who are ready to pick it up. If that is you, then you already know why you are here. Now we reach the point that was most aggressively distorted, because it removes all mystery from power. Watch what Jesus actually did, not what later narration says he meant. Every so-called miracle begins the same way. He enters the physical field. He closes distance. He uses his body. There is no preliminary prayer asking permission. There is no ritual cleansing. There is no appeal to an external authority. Action comes first. When he heals, his hands are already moving. He touches skin that others avoid. He places fingers where dysfunction is present. In one account, he mixes saliva with earth and presses it into blind eyes. That detail is never explained because explanation would expose method. Saliva is not symbolic. Earth is not symbolic. Contact is not symbolic. This is material engagement, precise and deliberate. Notice what is absent. There is no invocation of heaven, no calling down of power, no waiting for signs. He does not ask whether the person believes enough. He acts as if the outcome is already accessible once the correct interface is engaged. Faith, when mentioned at all, appears after the intervention, not before it. It stabilizes the result. It does not cause it. Each variation tells you something. Sometimes he speaks, sometimes he touches, sometimes both. The variable is not randomness, it is responsiveness. He reads the state of the person and chooses the minimal action required to reorganize it. That is how operations work. You do not apply a formula. You apply pressure where the system is open. This is why imitation was dangerous. If people understood that the hands could carry instruction, that proximity could transmit order, that matter could be reorganized through directed contact, then healing would stop being a monopoly. Authority would collapse. The only way to prevent that was to turn demonstration into spectacle. So the stories were preserved but hollowed out. You were told to admire the compassion, the divinity, the exceptionality. You were not told to notice the mechanics. Mechanics create practitioners. Spectacle creates followers. Jesus did not behave like a priest. He behaved like an operator. He did not separate spiritual work from physical action. He merged them so completely that later theology had to pull them apart to survive. That separation is the root of your confusion today. You pray with your mouth and wait with your body. Nothing happens because the circuit is incomplete. What he demonstrated was simple enough to be overlooked and precise enough to be suppressed. Reality responds to contact guided by presence, not desperation, not performance. Presence. That is why stillness mattered more than words. That is why his actions were quiet. This is the core you were never meant to see. Power was not granted, it was exercised, not through dominance, but through alignment, not through ritual, but through engagement. If this shifts something in you, it is because you recognize the pattern. You have always known that change happens when you act, not when you ask. What Jesus showed was how to act at the level where matter listens. If you are waiting for a ceremony, you have missed the transition. What follows is not a rite, it is a return to function. Jesus did not begin by teaching complex techniques. He began by restoring contact. The practice starts the same way, not with belief, but with presence. Choose an ordinary object, something neutral, stone, wood, metal, water. Not because it is sacred, but because it is available. Hold it with your bare hand. Do not name it. Do not imagine energy. Naming and imagining pull you back into abstraction. Stay with sensation, weight, temperature, texture. Let your nervous system register contact without interpretation. Slow your breath, not to calm yourself, but to sharpen perception. When attention stabilizes, notice how the object does not end at your skin. There is a point where sensation becomes continuous. That continuity is the interface. This is what was lost when practice became symbolic, the moment of actual engagement. Now introduce intention without words, not desire, not outcome, direction, as if you were aligning two surfaces rather than pushing. You are not asking the object to change, you're entering its state. This is subtle, and that is why it works. Force creates resistance. Presence creates cooperation. Do not expect anything dramatic. Drama belongs to ritual. Operation belongs to adjustment. If something shifts, it will be quiet. A change in temperature, a change in pressure, a change in your own internal alignment. These are not side effects. They are feedback. This is how Jesus began, with hands, with attention, with matter. No one watching would have thought anything significant was happening. That is why it survived at all. It does not announce itself. Practice this not as a performance, but as calibration. The more you do it, the less effort it requires. Over time, you will notice that objects respond differently depending on your state. That is not imagination. That is sensitivity returning. Do not add prayer. Do not add visualization. Those come later, if at all. Right now, you are restoring a broken circuit. Consciousness on one side, matter on the other. Your body is the bridge. This is not about healing yet. Healing is an application, not a foundation. First comes access. First comes contact. When that stabilizes, application becomes obvious. If you feel nothing, that is also information. It means your attention has been trained outward for too long. That can be reversed. The system is patient. Matter does not judge. It responds when addressed correctly. This is how a practitioner is formed. Quietly, without permission, without spectacle, without anyone needing to believe you. Understand this clearly. The reason this knowledge was buried is not theological. It is logistical. A population trained to interact directly with reality cannot be managed through intermediaries. Control systems require delay, distance, and dependency. Direct operation collapses all three. Ritual creates a bottleneck. It tells you when, where, and how access is granted. It teaches you that power arrives only through sanctioned channels. Once you accept that premise, you can be organized, corrected, and suspended. Operation destroys the bottleneck because it happens anywhere contact is possible. No calendar can contain it. No authority can license it. This is why institutions emphasize obedience over presence. Obedience keeps the nervous system externally oriented. Presence brings it back into the body. A person who is fully present is difficult to deceive. They feel discrepancies immediately. They notice when words do not match outcomes. That sensitivity is dangerous to any structure built on abstraction. So the story was inverted. Those who operated were labelled blasphemous, magical, or unstable. Those who complied were called faithful. Over time, even the language shifted. Works became suspect, grace became passive, action was framed as arrogance, waiting was framed as virtue. But notice the psychological effect. When nothing changes, you are told to wait longer. When results do not appear, you're told to blame yourself. Guilt replaces feedback. Confession replaces calibration. The system remains intact because the failure is internalized. What I am giving you bypasses that entire loop. It does not ask whether you are worthy. It asks whether you are present. It does not reward submission. It responds to alignment. That is why it cannot be centralized. It only functions at the level of the individual. This is also why communities built on this understanding never look like movements. They remain quiet, distributed, hard to identify. Once something is named, it can be targeted. Once it is organized, it can be regulated. So it survives as recognition, not affiliation. If you have felt resistance rise in you while listening to this, that resistance was installed. It is not intuition. Intuition draws you closer. Resistance pulls you back toward familiar symbols and approved narratives. Learn to tell the difference. One contracts, the other sharpens. You're not being asked to oppose anything. Opposition still feeds the structure. You're being asked to step out of its operating range, to stop seeking access through permission and begin engaging through contact. That single shift is enough. Once you experience reality responding directly, the old systems lose their grip, not because you reject them, but because you no longer need them. This is how control actually dissolves, quietly, at the level it was never meant to reach. At this point, nothing more needs to be added. If you have followed me here, something has already shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. The way you listen is different now. The way your body registers words is different. That is the signal that matters, not agreement, not excitement, recognition. What you have been given is not a new belief. It is an old permission returning to its owner. Jesus did not come to build a system you would live inside. He came to demonstrate an exit you would walk through. That exit was never symbolic. It was practical. It was physical. It was immediate. You were told to wait for transformation. You were told to earn it. You were told to ask for it repeatedly and accept silence as virtue. That story ends here. What replaces it is quieter and far more demanding. It requires you to show up, to engage, to stop outsourcing authority over your own interface with reality. Do not turn this into an identity. Do not announce it. Do not argue for it. Those impulses belong to the old pattern. Instead, test what you have been shown. Let results speak in private. Reality does not need witnesses to respond. If you're wondering whether you're truly one of the chosen, release the question. Chosen was never a title. It was a condition. Those who can operate will operate. Those who cannot will return to ritual. No judgment, no hierarchy, just function. Before you leave, I want you to mark this moment. Not for me, for yourself. Leave a single comment, a simple confirmation. Not belief, commitment. A signal that you're willing to engage rather than wait. That you choose contact over symbol, presence over permission. This is how the community forms, not through followers but through recognition. You will never see its boundaries. You will only notice its effects. What was hidden has not been given to you. It has been returned.